A crumbling well on a drought-stricken farm. One struggling farmer's desperate search for water that uncovered not life-sustaining liquid, but a centuries-old chamber brimming with meticulously preserved artifacts. Sam Mitchell's accidental discovery would not only reshape his family's destiny, but illuminate a forgotten chapter of Riverdale's past that could heal the bitter divide threatening to tear the community apart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The relentless July sun beat down on Sam Mitchell's parched fields as he stared hopelessly at the withered corn stalks that should have been shoulder high by now. At 47, the third-generation farmer had weathered difficult seasons before, but this drought, now entering its second year, threatened everything his family had built over decades. With just $3,972 16s in his bank account and loan payments looming, Sam faced the very real possibility of being the Mitchell who lost the farm after nearly a century of family stewardship. "Dad, I found those old irrigation plans Grandpa Harold mentioned," called Emma, his 16-year-old daughter, emerging from the barn with dust-covered blueprints. Despite the mounting pressure of potential foreclosure, Emma maintained an unshakable belief that they would find a way through, spending her summer vacation researching sustainable farming techniques instead of enjoying normal teenage activities. The harsh buzz of Sam's phone cut through the heavy afternoon air. The screen displayed the number for Riverside Elder Care. His chest tightened as he answered. "Mr. Mitchell? This is Nurse Daniels from Riverside. I'm very sorry to tell you that your grandfather passed away peacefully in his sleep about an hour ago." Though Harold Mitchell had been declining for months, his mind gradually surrendering memories to dementia, the finality of losing the family patriarch hit Sam like a physical blow. At 93, Harold had been the living connection to the farm's history, the repository of knowledge about the land that had sustained 3 generations of Mitchells through good seasons and bad. A week after the modest funeral, Sam found himself in the wood-paneled office of Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who had handled the Mitchell family's legal matters for decades. Though he expected this meeting to be a simple formality, there couldn't be much to Harold's estate beyond personal effects. Jennifer's expression suggested otherwise. "Your grandfather amended his will last year during a period of remarkable clarity," she explained, sliding a folder across her desk containing photographs and documents. "There's something he specifically wanted you to know about." The photos showed what appeared to be an old stone well partially hidden behind the abandoned equipment shed on the northwest corner of the Mitchell property. Sam had always assumed it was just one of several defunct wells scattered across the farm, rendered obsolete when central plumbing was installed in the 1960s. "Harold was quite insistent about this well," Jennifer continued. "His notes indicate it was hand-dug by your great-great-grandfather in 1868, shortly after returning from the Civil War. Unlike the other wells on the property, this one was never connected to the modern water system and has been unused for generations." Sam frowned, puzzled by his grandfather's attention to an abandoned well when the farm had so many more pressing concerns. "I don't understand. What's significant about an old well?" Jennifer handed him a sealed envelope, Harold's neat handwriting marking it, "For Sam, when the land is most thirsty." Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a hand-drawn map, with the well prominently marked, along with the cryptic note, "When water fails above, seek truth below. Some treasures are measured in knowledge, not gold." "There's one more thing," Jennifer added, her expression growing serious. "The property tax assessment for the northwest parcel, where the well is located, shows a separate historical designation dating back to 1925. Your grandfather maintained this special status through a private arrangement with the County Historical Commission, paying a substantial additional fee annually. The designation expires next month and requires renewal with a $7,500 filing fee. Sam stared at the figure, nearly double what remained in his bank account after funeral expenses. I can't possibly afford this right now. Does letting this designation lapse affect our ownership of the land? Not directly, Jennifer explained, but it does remove certain protections that your grandfather apparently valued greatly. The Historical Commission records don't specify exactly what's being protected, only that Harold insisted on maintaining the designation his father had established. Sam left the attorney's office with a ring of rusted iron keys, the mysterious map, and yet another financial burden he couldn't shoulder, all connected to a well he'd barely noticed in his lifetime. That evening, as the setting sun cast long shadows across the parched farmland, Emma insisted they investigate the well immediately. Grandpa Harold wouldn't have gone to all this trouble without good reason, she argued, studying the map with intense curiosity. And we need water anyway. Maybe there's still a viable source down there that could help with irrigation. The walk to the northwest corner took longer than Sam remembered. He rarely had reason to visit this unproductive section of the property. The equipment shed sagged with decades of neglect, its weathered boards bleached silver gray by countless seasons of sun and rain. Behind it, partially obscured by overgrown brambles, stood the stone well Harold had been so concerned about. Unlike the other wells on the property, this one featured carefully fitted limestone blocks rather than the typical fieldstone construction. The capstones around its circumference bore faint carvings, the designs nearly eroded by time and weather. A heavy wooden cover, reinforced with iron bands, lay partially dislodged on one side. "This craftsmanship is incredible," Emma murmured, running her fingers over the worn symbols etched into the stone. "These don't look like normal mason's marks. They're too elaborate." As Sam examined the well's structure more closely, he noticed something unusual about its dimensions. "This is almost twice the diameter of a typical water well from that period," he observed. "And look at how the interior stones are dressed and fitted. That's masonry work you'd see in a foundation, not a simple farm well." Using a powerful flashlight, they peered into the darkness below. Instead of reflecting water, the beam revealed dry stone walls descending about 20 feet before disappearing into what appeared to be an opening or passageway in the side of the well shaft. "Dad, this isn't just a well," Emma whispered, excitement evident in her voice. "It looks like it might lead somewhere." Their exploration was interrupted by the distant sound of an approaching vehicle. A cloud of dust marked a car making its way up the long driveway toward the farmhouse. "That's Dr. Garcia's truck," Emma said, recognizing the distinctive red pickup belonging to her high school history teacher. "I texted him about Grandpa's map. He specializes in Civil War-era local history at the State University." Dr. Thomas Garcia, a man in his early 50s with salt and pepper hair and the weathered complexion of someone who spent considerable time on archaeological digs, approached with enthusiastic strides. After expressing condolences for Harold's passing, he examined the well with evident fascination. "This is remarkable," he pronounced, inspecting the carvings with a practiced eye. These symbols combine Masonic imagery with Civil War regiment markings, specifically the 47th Volunteer Infantry, which included many men from this region. But this arrangement is unusual. I've never seen them configured quite this way. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As Dr. Garcia continued examining the well structure, he shared historical context that brought new significance to their discovery. After the Civil War, This area experienced significant tensions. Riverdale had been deeply divided, with families fighting on both sides of the conflict. The return of veterans created friction that persisted for decades. "Is that why my great-great-grandfather built such an unusual well?" Sam asked, struggling to connect family history with broader historical events. "I don't think this was built primarily as a water source," Dr. Garcia replied, his expression thoughtful. "The craftsmanship, the markings, the dimensions, they suggest something more deliberate. Many returning soldiers brought back experiences with underground structures they'd encountered during the war. Bunkers, storage facilities, even escape tunnels in prison camps." Their conversation was interrupted by another approaching vehicle, an expensive black SUV with tinted windows and the Horizon Development Group logo emblazoned on its side. Richard Brennan, the company's acquisition manager, stepped out in crisp business attire that looked oddly out of place against the dusty farm backdrop. "Mr. Mitchell," he called with practiced cordiality, "I was hoping to catch you at home. Your neighbor, Jim Patterson, just accepted our offer on his property, and I wanted to discuss the increased valuation this creates for your land." Horizon had been systematically purchasing struggling farms throughout the drought-stricken county, converting agricultural land to upscale housing developments with artificial lakes and golf courses. Their water-intensive projects had become increasingly controversial as the drought worsened. When Brennan spotted the well and noticed Dr. Garcia's university identification badge, his expression shifted subtly. "I see you're examining some of the property's historical features. Anything significant?" Horizon takes great pride in preserving historical elements when possible. They add valuable character to our developments. "Just family research," Sam replied non-committally, suddenly protective of their discovery. "My grandfather recently passed, and we're going through his effects." Brennan's gaze lingered on the well a moment too long. "Well, if you decide to consider our offer, we're prepared to resolve any outstanding tax issues as part of the purchase agreement. In times like these, selling might be the most practical solution for everyone." After the developer departed, Dr. Garcia turned to Sam with a concerned expression. "That man seemed very interested in this well, more than would be warranted by casual curiosity. I think we should document everything properly before word spreads about what you found." The three of them worked until dusk, photographing the well's exterior features and making detailed notes about the carvings. Dr. Garcia pointed out how certain symbols appeared to be directional markers rather than decorative elements, possibly indicating something specific about the underground structure. In secret societies and military contexts of that era, symbolic language often conveyed information only initiates could understand, he explained. These could be telling us about what lies beneath or warning unauthorized visitors away. As darkness fell, they reluctantly decided to postpone further exploration until they could gather proper equipment. Safety had to come first, especially given the well's age and the unknown stability of whatever lay beyond that side passage. "I'll bring proper gear tomorrow," Dr. Garcia promised. "Climbing equipment, better lights, air quality monitors. If there's a chamber down there that's been sealed for over a century, we need to be cautious about potential hazards." That night, unable to sleep, Sam pored over his grandfather's papers by lamplight at the kitchen table. Among Harold's effects was a small leather-bound journal dating from 1947, the year his grandfather had inherited the farm from his own father. The brittle pages contained meticulous notes about maintaining the well structure and ensuring the historical designation remained intact. One entry caught Sam's attention. "Father explained our family's duty today. Like each generation since Caleb's time, we are guardians not just of land, but of truth. The well must remain sealed but preserved, its contents protected not from historical interest, but from those who would misuse its significance." Another entry, dated 1963, mentioned Harrington's grandson visited today. First approach from that family in my lifetime. Asked about certain documents that might help with financial difficulties. Reminded him of the agreement. What lies beneath belongs to history, not to either family. He seemed desperate, but accepted the refusal. Sam frowned, puzzled by the reference to the Harrington family. The name tickled something in his memory, but he couldn't immediately place it. Eventually, exhaustion claimed him, and he fell asleep at the table, the journal open beneath his hand. Morning brought the sound of more vehicles approaching the farm. Sam stepped onto the porch to find not just Dr. Garcia's truck, but also Margaret Wilson's compact car pulling into the driveway. The town librarian had been a friend of Harold's for decades, and her expertise in local history might prove valuable. I came as soon as Tom called, Margaret explained, her silver hair neatly pinned back, sensible shoes already dusty from the farm lane. Your grandfather often hinted at historical materials the Mitchell family was protecting, but he never specified details. I've brought some county archives that might help contextualize what you found. As they walked toward the well, Sam shared the journal entries he discovered overnight. Margaret's expression grew animated at the mention of the Harrington name. That's fascinating, she remarked. The Harringtons were one of Riverdale's founding families, extensive landowners south of town. Francis Harrington was a Confederate officer who returned after the war to rebuild his family's holdings. According to traditional accounts, he and your ancestor Caleb Mitchell were bitter enemies whose feud shaped local politics for decades. Then why would a Harrington come asking about documents my grandfather was protecting? Sam wondered. That's the question, isn't it? Margaret replied thoughtfully. Official histories often simplify complex relationships. The journal suggests a connection between the families that contradicts the public narrative. Their conversation paused as they reached the well, where Dr. Garcia was already unloading equipment from his truck. Ropes, harnesses, air monitoring, devices, and powerful lights designed for underground exploration. I've contacted the State Historical Preservation Office, he informed them, laying out the gear with methodical precision. Based on my preliminary report and photographs, they're sending a representative, but it could be days before they arrive. Given the potential historical significance and the interest already shown by developers, I believe we should document what's down there as soon as possible. The morning sun had barely cleared the eastern tree line when they heard another vehicle approaching, the distinctive purr of an expensive engine that proved to be Richard Brennan's black SUV returning. This time, he wasn't alone. Mayor Frank Collins accompanied him, along with a woman in business attire who introduced herself as Patricia Reynolds, County Zoning Administrator. Mr. Mitchell, the mayor began with the practiced smile of a career politician, we understand you've discovered something of potential historical interest on your property. Ms. Reynolds is here to ensure proper protocols are followed regarding any excavation or exploration of historical features. Patricia. Reynolds produced an official-looking document. This is a temporary cease and desist order regarding any investigation of the well structure until proper permits can be secured and county archaeologists can assess potential impact on groundwater resources during the drought emergency. Dr. Garcia stepped forward, credentials in hand. As a state university archaeologist, I'm well versed in preservation protocols. We're merely conducting initial documentation with non-invasive methods. No excavation is planned at this stage. Nevertheless, Reynolds countered smoothly, given the drought conditions and potential groundwater concerns, the county has jurisdiction to temporarily suspend access. Sam noticed Richard Brennan hanging back, his expression carefully neutral, but his eyes locked on the well with undisguised interest. This sudden official involvement seemed suspiciously convenient, especially given Horizon's pattern of acquiring properties throughout the region. This feels like regulatory overreach, Sam challenged, standing his ground. The well has been on Mitchell land for over 150 years. My family has maintained historical designation on this specific parcel since 1925. What's the real concern here? Amaya Collins' smile tightened. No one's questioning your ownership, Sam. This is simply about following proper procedures. The county has responsibilities regarding historical artifacts, water resources, and public safety. Margaret Wilson, who had remained quiet during the exchange, suddenly spoke up. That's interesting, Frank, because when the Historical Society requested access to the old courthouse building last year to document Civil War-era records, you told us county resources were too limited for dusty old history projects. What's different now? The mayor's discomfort was visible. Different circumstances, Margaret. Drought emergency changes priorities. Or perhaps different interests involved, she suggested pointedly, glancing toward Brennan. After tense negotiations, a compromise was reached. The county officials would permit initial documentation of the well structure and limited exploration of what lay beneath, provided that Dr. Garcia submitted detailed reports and that any artifacts remained in place until proper permits were secured. The mayor and zoning administrator departed, but Richard Brennan lingered. My offer still stands, Mitchell, he said quietly. Whatever historical curiosities might be down there, they can't help you make loan payments or survive another season of drought. Horizon can resolve all your financial concerns and ensure whatever's found is properly preserved. I appreciate your concern, Sam replied dryly, but I'll make decisions about my family's property when I fully understand what we're dealing with. As Brennan finally departed, Dr. Garcia turned to Sam with a worried expression. That level of official interest is unusual for a preliminary investigation. Whatever's down there, certain people seem determined to control the narrative around it. All the more reason to document everything thoroughly, Margaret added. Historical truth has a way of being reshaped when powerful interests get involved. With the temporary agreement in place, they proceeded with preparation for exploring the well. Dr. Garcia installed anchoring points and tested the air quality at various depths, while Sam studied the keys his grandfather had left. Several appeared designed for older locks rather than modern doors. Emma, who had been examining Margaret's county archives, called them over excitedly. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a faded map dated 1870. It shows property boundaries from right after the Civil War. The Mitchell Farm and Harrington Plantation shared a boundary line exactly where the well is located. This wasn't just on our land. It was built precisely on the property line between former enemies. Dr. Garcia whistled softly. That's significant. In the post-war period, property boundaries between Union and Confederate veterans would have been carefully monitored and likely contentious. Building a structure that straddled such a boundary would have required cooperation, or at least tacit agreement, which contradicts the historical account of bitter enmity between the families, Margaret noted. The official history describes Caleb Mitchell and Francis Harrington as leaders of opposing factions whose feud dominated local politics for decades after the war. As the afternoon progressed, they completed safety preparations and were finally ready to begin exploring what lay beneath. Dr. Garcia would lead the descent, with Sam following. Emma and Margaret would remain above, monitoring communications and maintaining a log of their discoveries. The descent into the well was tense, but manageable with modern equipment. The stone walls, though aged, remained remarkably solid, testament to the skilled craftsmanship of their construction. At approximately 20 feet down, they reached the lateral opening they had spotted from above. An arched passage extended horizontally into the earth, reinforced with fitted stonework that suggested deliberate planned construction rather than a natural feature. "This is definitely not just a well," Dr. Garcia observed, his voice hushed with professional awe as they carefully entered the passage. "This is a deliberately constructed underground room, essentially a chamber built below ground level, with the well shaft serving as a vertical entrance." As they moved further into the passage, their headlamps revealed an expansive rectangular space, approximately 15 by 20 feet. The walls were constructed of fitted stone, the ceiling supported by timber beams that showed minimal decay, thanks to the cool, dry conditions underground. Most remarkably, the chamber contained wooden shelving, storage chests, and a large central table, all preserved by the stable environment. These surfaces held dozens of artifacts carefully arranged and preserved: military uniforms from both Union and Confederate armies, weapons, flags, personal correspondence, leather-bound journals, maps, and what appeared to be town records, all meticulously organized and labeled with identification tags yellowed by age. "This isn't random storage," Dr. Garcia whispered, carefully examining document cases without touching their contents. "This is a deliberate archive, a preservation chamber created to protect these materials from deterioration or discovery." Sam approached the central table where a large ledger lay open. The pages contained handwriting that alternated between two distinct styles, one flowing and elegant, the other more practical and compact. The entries documented meetings, agreements, and what appeared to be evidence gathering spanning from 1865 to 1877. The final entry, dated November 1877, read, "We commit these truths to the Earth's protection, to be revealed when Riverdale is ready to acknowledge its shared wounds and common future. May our descendants recognize that healing begins with honest remembrance." The entry was signed C. Mitchell and F. Harrington. They were working together, Sam realized, the pieces falling into place. Former enemies collaborating in secret while the town remained divided. Dr. Garcia carefully photographed the chamber's contents, paying particular attention to document cases labeled Westerly Mining Corporation, Evidence of Manipulation, and Reconciliation Agreement, private terms. "Based on what I'm seeing," he observed, "this chamber wasn't created just to preserve artifacts. It was designed to protect evidence, documentation of something your ancestor and Harrington felt needed to be safeguarded until some future date." Their exploration was interrupted by Emma's voice over the radio. "Dad, you need to come up. There's something happening you should see." Their ascent revealed a concerning development. 3 additional vehicles had arrived at the farm, 2 unmarked black SUVs and a county sheriff's patrol car. Deputy Wallace, who Sam had known since high school, approached with an apologetic expression. "Sam, I've got orders to secure the site pending a formal determination by the County Historical Commission. Apparently there's concern about unauthorized removal of historically significant artifacts." "We haven't removed anything," Sam protested. "Dr. Garcia has been documenting in place, following all proper archaeological protocols." The deputy shrugged. "I'm just following instructions." Mayor Collins called it in personally. Richard Brennan emerged from one of the SUVs, accompanied by a man Sam didn't recognize, expensively dressed in his 60s with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to authority. "Mr. Mitchell," Brennan called, "this is James Harrington, the CEO of Horizon Development and descendant of the original Harrington family. He'd like to discuss the historical materials you've discovered." The older man approached, extending his hand with practiced courtesy. "Mr. Mitchell, I understand you've located what may be a shared historical archive involving both our families. As the current Harrington patriarch, I have a vested interest in any materials concerning my ancestors." Sam felt a surge of protectiveness toward the chamber and its contents. "From what we've discovered so far, your ancestor and mine created this archive together. apparently in direct contradiction to the public narrative about their relationship. "Family histories often contain surprises," Harrington replied smoothly, "which is why proper evaluation by qualified experts is essential. Horizon is prepared to fund complete professional preservation of these materials as part of a broader agreement regarding your property." Dr. Garcia joined them, documentary evidence in hand. "Mr. Harrington, the preliminary findings suggest this chamber was created specifically to preserve evidence of post-war reconciliation between formerly opposing families and to document how commercial interests deliberately maintained public divisions for financial gain." Harrington's expression remained carefully neutral, but Sam noticed a flicker of something, concern perhaps, in his eyes. "All the more reason for proper scholarly examination. Historical context is essential for understanding such materials." As tensions mounted, with Deputy Wallace uncomfortably positioned between the parties, Margaret Wilson's voice cut through the standoff. She had been reviewing documents from her archives throughout the confrontation, and now approached with papers in hand. "Before anyone makes claims about historical jurisdiction," she announced firmly, "everyone should see this." She held up a legal document dated 1877. "This is a copy of a joint trust agreement filed with the county by Caleb Mitchell and Francis Harrington, establishing what they called the Riverdale Reconciliation Archives. It specifically states that the preserved materials shall remain untouched until such time as both families consent to their revelation or until social conditions permit their disclosure without risk of violence or suppression." She turned to Harrington directly. "As town historian, I've been searching for these archives for decades. Your grandfather denied their existence when I inquired in the 1980s. Now we know why. The trust agreement gave equal authority to both families, preventing either from unilaterally controlling the narrative. The revelation created a momentary impasse. Deputy Wallace, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating situation, suggested a temporary compromise. The well site would be secured against unauthorized access, but no materials would be removed pending a formal hearing before the County Historical Commission the following week. As the various officials departed, Sam, Emma, Dr. Garcia, and Margaret gathered on the farmhouse porch to consider their next steps. The discovery had clearly triggered powerful interests. Official intervention at this level for a historical find on private property was unusual and concerning. "They're afraid of something in those records," Margaret observed quietly. "The question is what and why it matters enough a century and a half later to prompt this level of response." "Taduska, whatever it is," Emma added, "it connects to both families and challenges the accepted history of Riverdale's development after the Civil War." Sam thought about the financial pressure still bearing down on him. The loan payments, the historical designation fee coming due, the parched fields yielding no income. Selling to Horizon would resolve these immediate concerns, but at what cost to historical truth? 5 generations of Mitchells had protected those records, maintaining the chamber and its contents at considerable expense, even in difficult times. "We need to understand exactly what's in those documents before the hearing," he decided, "not just for our sake, but because my ancestors and Harringtons went to extraordinary lengths to preserve this information for future generations. Whatever they discovered was important enough to create an elaborate underground archive when they were publicly perceived as bitter enemies." At dawn the next day, Sam awoke to find Emma already at the kitchen table, surrounded by copies of the photographs Dr. Garcia had taken in the chamber. She had organized them by apparent category: military records, business documents, personal correspondence, and town meeting minutes. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, pushing a cup of coffee toward her father. "I've been thinking about what's really at stake here. This isn't just about historical curiosity. There's something in those records that still matters to people with power in Riverdale. Sam nodded, examining the images of documents from the chamber. The question is, what connection exists between post-Civil War events and current interests? What thread runs through 150 years that's worth this much effort to control? Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Margaret Wilson had returned, bringing additional archival materials from the town library's restricted collection. "I've been thinking about the timing," she explained, spreading yellowed newspaper clippings across the table. The chamber was sealed in 1877, exactly when Westerly Mining Corporation consolidated control over most industrial operations in the county. The official history credits their economic dominance to shrewd business practices during Reconstruction. But these records suggest something darker. One clipping described a mining accident in 1873 that claimed the lives of 15 workers, including relatives of both the Mitchell and Harrington families. The article quoted company officials blaming insufficient safety precautions by inexperienced workers, but a handwritten note in the margin read, "Deliberate falsehood. Evidence shows management knew of unsafe conditions months prior." This could have been their turning point, Dr. Garcia suggested, joining them after examining the photographic documentation overnight. A shared tragedy that transcended their political differences and united them against a common adversary. Dr. Garcia had brought printouts of additional research he'd conducted on Westerly Mining's corporate lineage. Here's where it gets interesting and potentially explains current interest in suppressing these records. Westerly Mining eventually evolved through various mergers and acquisitions into what is now Harrington Enterprises, the parent company of Horizon Development. So James Harrington III isn't just interested as a family descendant, Sam realized. His corporate empire literally grew from the company his ancestor was apparently gathering evidence against. Which creates a fascinating contradiction, Margaret noted. The modern Harrington fortune stems from a company that the original Francis Harrington was secretly documenting for unethical practices. Meanwhile, the public narrative portrays the Harringtons as staunch defenders of business interests and the Mitchells as labor sympathizers, when in reality they were united in opposing corporate exploitation. Emma had been studying the property, maps more carefully. There's something else interesting about the well's location. It's positioned directly above an underground water channel that feeds the county's main aquifer, essentially at the source of the region's water supply. Sam's eyes widened at the implication. And Horizon's developments are notoriously water-intensive: golf courses, decorative lakes, private swimming pools. If they're planning to tap that water source for development during a drought, it would explain their sudden urgency to acquire your property, Dr. Garcia finished. Environmental regulations would normally prevent such exploitation, but if they owned the land outright. We need to see if there's any documentation in the chamber about water rights, Sam decided. If my ancestor and Harrington were forward-thinking, enough to preserve evidence of corporate malfeasance, they might have also established legal protections for natural resources. Despite the county's order restricting access to the well, they determined that a limited, careful examination of specific documents might be justified given the potential threat to public resources. Dr. Garcia would make a quick descent to Wendell, retrieve only the water rights documentation, taking care not to disturb other materials. As they approached the well site, however, they discovered concerning evidence of tampering. The security seals Deputy Wallace had placed on the temporary covering were broken, and fresh boot prints surrounded the structure. Someone's been down. There, Dr. Garcia observed grimly after a quick inspection. Recently, probably last night. Sam felt a surge of anger and betrayal. They're removing evidence before the hearing. We need to document this immediately. Dr. Garcia carefully descended into the chamber while the others photographed the broken seals and footprints. His voice crackled over the radio minutes later, confirming their fears. Several document cases have been disturbed, specifically those labeled water rights and westerly mining evidence. Some contents appear to be missing. When he emerged, Dr. Garcia brought troubling news. They were selective in what they took legal agreements establishing shared water rights protection and the most damning evidence against westerly mining. But they missed something important. From his equipment bag, he produced a small leather-bound volume that had been hidden behind the larger document cases. This is Caleb Mitchell's personal journal. It contains copies of key agreements and detailed accounts of his collaboration with Francis Harrington, including their investigation into Westerly's practices. The journal revealed how the former enemies had discovered that Westerly Mining had deliberately inflamed regional tensions after the war to prevent returning veterans from both armies from uniting around labor issues. Company agents had planted provocative stories in local newspapers, funded opposing political candidates, and even orchestrated confrontations at public events, all to maintain division in the workforce and prevent organized resistance to exploitative practices. Most damning was documentation of how Westerly had secured exclusive mineral and water rights throughout the county through manipulation, intimidation, and occasionally outright fraud, rights that had subsequently transferred through corporate succession to Harrington Enterprises. This explains everything, Margaret breathed as they reviewed the journal's contents. The modern Harrington companies have based their water access claims on legal precedents established through these questionable means. If these records were made public, their development plans throughout the drought-stricken region could face serious legal challenges, Sam finished. No wonder they're so desperate to control this property. Emma had been studying the journal's final entries with growing excitement. There's more. Caleb and Francis didn't just document the problems, they created a legal solution. They established the Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust, placing the aquifer access points under joint family protection with explicit prohibition against commercial exploitation during resource scarcity. Which means, Dr. Garcia added, that the water rights Horizon is counting on for their developments are actually restricted during drought conditions by a 150-year-old trust that's still legally binding. Uddin, a vehicle approached the farmhouse. Not the expected official cars, but an aging pickup truck. To everyone's surprise, Deputy Wallace emerged, out of uniform and visibly troubled. "I'm not here officially," he explained quickly. "But you should know, Mayor Collins and Harrington are pushing for an emergency order to excavate the entire well structure for safety reasons before the hearing. They're claiming the chamber poses an imminent threat to groundwater safety. They're trying to destroy the evidence before it can be properly documented," Sam realized. Once they remove the materials, they'll control the narrative about what was found. "I can't officially help you," Wallace continued, clearly uncomfortable with the ethical dilemma. "But my grandmother always said the Mitchell and Harrington families shared a secret that could heal the county's oldest wounds. I think that's worth protecting." They now faced a critical decision. The legal hearing was still days away, but the emergency excavation order could be executed within hours. The chamber's contents, what remained of them, needed protection, but moving historical artifacts against county orders carried serious legal consequences. "We need to bring this to the public immediately," Margaret suggested. "Once the information is widely known, it becomes harder to suppress." "But we need irrefutable documentation," Dr. Garcia cautioned. "Allegations without evidence won't stand against Harrington's legal resources." Sam remembered his grandfather's journal entry. The well must remain sealed but preserved, its contents protected not from historical interest, but from those who would misuse its significance. His ancestors hadn't simply been preserving historical curiosities. They had been safeguarding evidence of corporate manipulation that had shaped the community's development for generations. "We'll digitize everything immediately," he decided. "Every document, every artifact, every page of the journal, with proper authentication protocols. Then we distribute copies to multiple trusted sources before they can execute the excavation." Order? Emma, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly looked up from the property maps she'd been studying. "There's something else we're missing. The journal mentions a secondary preservation site as insurance against discovery or destruction of the main chamber. It's referenced as where waters meet beneath stone." Deputy Wallace's expression changed. "The old spring house, where the underground streams converge under Sentinel Rock. It's on the border between the original Mitchell and Harrington properties. This forgotten structure, half buried in undergrowth at the property's edge, had been used generations ago to keep dairy products cool using flowing spring water. Long abandoned with the advent of refrigeration, it had faded from regular use and attention, the perfect secondary hiding place. As the afternoon sun began its descent toward the horizon, they faced a race against time, documenting the chamber's remaining contents while searching for the secondary cache, all before Harrington and the county officials could return with their emergency excavation order. As tensions mounted between the parties, Margaret Wilson's voice cut through the standoff with unexpected authority. She had been reviewing documents from her archives throughout the confrontation and now approached, with papers in hand, her silver hair catching the afternoon sunlight. "Before anyone stakes claims about historical jurisdiction," she announced firmly, "everyone should examine this." She held up a legal document, its aged paper protected in an archival sleeve. "This is a copy of a joint trust agreement filed with the county by Caleb Mitchell and Francis Harrington in 1877, establishing what they called the Riverdale Reconciliation Archives. It specifically states that the preserved materials shall remain untouched until such time as both families consent to their revelation, or until social conditions permit their disclosure without risk of violence or suppression." She turned to James Harrington directly, her librarian's glasses perched low on her nose as she peered over them with pointed significance. "As town historian, I've spent 30 years searching for these archives. Your grandfather adamantly denied their existence when I inquired in the 1980s. Now we understand why. The trust agreement gave equal authority to both families, preventing either from unilaterally controlling the narrative. The revelation created a momentary impasse. No one had anticipated the existence of a formal legal agreement governing the chamber's contents. Deputy Wallace, clearly uncomfortable with the escalating tensions and conflicting authorities, wiped sweat from his brow and suggested a temporary compromise. "Look," he said, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, "how about this? We secure the site against unauthorized access, but no materials get removed pending a formal hearing before the County Historical Commission next week. That gives everyone time to research their legal positions and prepare proper documentation." After reluctant nods of agreement from all parties, the deputy placed official seals on a temporary covering over the well entrance. James Harrington departed with barely concealed frustration, while Richard Brennan lingered long enough to remind Sam that Horizon's purchase offer remained open but not indefinitely. As the dust from the departing vehicle settled on the drought-parched driveway, Sam, Emma, Dr. Garcia, and Margaret gathered on the farmhouse porch to assess their situation. The discovery had triggered powerful interests far beyond what Sam had anticipated when they first peered into the old well. We need to understand exactly what's in those documents before the hearing, Sam decided, pouring iced tea for everyone from a pitcher Emma had prepared. Not just for our sake, but because my ancestors and Harringtons went to extraordinary lengths to preserve this information for future generations. Whatever they discovered was important enough to create an elaborate underground archive when they were publicly perceived as bitter enemies. Margaret nodded thoughtfully. The chamber's location is significant too, built precisely on the property line between Union and Confederate veterans. In that era, such boundaries were often tensely guarded, not venues for collaboration. We have limited time, Dr. Garcia added, checking his watch. The County Historical Commission meets next Thursday. That gives us 5 days to document the chamber's contents and understand their significance before others attempt to control the narrative. As twilight descended over the farm, they developed a plan. Dr. Garcia would return the following day with more sophisticated documentation equipment and additional preservation experts from the university. Margaret would delve deeper into county archives, searching for any other references to the Mitchell-Harrington Agreement or the Riverdale Reconciliation Archives. Sam and Emma would examine Harold's personal papers more thoroughly, looking for any family knowledge about the chamber that might have been passed down. Sleep came fitfully to Sam that night. The financial pressures that had seemed so overwhelming just days ago, the loan payments, the historical designation fee, the failing crops still loomed large, but were now overshadowed by a sense of historical responsibility he couldn't ignore. 5 generations of Mitchells had protected that chamber and its contents. Maintaining the historical designation, even when selling, would have resolved financial hardships. He couldn't be the one to surrender that legacy without fully understanding what they had been protecting. At dawn, Sam awoke to find Emma already at the kitchen table, surrounded by copies of the photographs Dr. Garcia had taken in the chamber. She had organized them by apparent category: military records, business documents, personal correspondence, and town meeting minutes, and was making detailed notes on a legal pad. "I couldn't sleep," she explained, pushing a cup of coffee toward her father as he joined her. "I've been thinking about what's really at stake here. This isn't just about historical curiosity. There's something in those records that still matters to people with power in Riverdale. Something worth sending the mayor and a corporate CEO to our farm on a moment's notice." Sam nodded, studying the photographs. "The question is, what connection exists between post-Civil War events and current interests? What thread runs through? 150 years, that's worth this much effort to control." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Margaret Wilson had returned earlier than expected, bringing additional archival materials from the town library's restricted collection. "I've been thinking about the timing," she explained, spreading yellowed newspaper clippings across the table. "The chamber was sealed in 1877, exactly when Westerly Mining Corporation consolidated control over most industrial operations in the county. The official history credits their economic dominance to shrewd business practices during Reconstruction, but these records suggest something darker. One clipping described a mining accident in 1873 that claimed the lives of 15 workers, including relatives of both the Mitchell and Harrington families. The article quoted company officials blaming insufficient safety precautions by inexperienced workers, but a handwritten note in the margin read, "Deliberate falsehood. Evidence shows management knew of unsafe conditions months prior." "This could have been their turning point," Sam suggested, instantly seeing the potential significance. A shared tragedy that transcended their political differences and united them against a common adversary. "Exactly," Margaret agreed. "And look at this." She pointed to another clipping announcing major water rights acquisitions by Westerly Mining in 1875, described as securing resources for industrial progress. The margins contained similar annotations challenging the official account, suggesting the rights had been obtained through manipulation of drought fears and falsified geological surveys. Dr. Garcia arrived as they were reviewing these materials, bringing not only sophisticated documentation equipment, but also results from his own research overnight. He spread printouts across the kitchen table, adding another layer to their growing understanding. "I traced Westerly Mining's corporate lineage," he explained, pointing to a complex chart of mergers and acquisitions spanning 150 years. "Here's where it gets interesting, and potentially explains current interest in suppressing these records. Westerly Mining eventually evolved through various corporate restructurings into what is now Harrington Enterprises, the parent company of Horizon Development. So James Harrington III isn't just interested as a family descendant, Sam realized, the pieces falling into place. His corporate empire literally grew from the company his ancestor was apparently gathering evidence against. Which creates a fascinating contradiction, Margaret noted, adjusting her glasses as she studied the corporate lineage. The modern Harrington fortune stems from a company that the original Francis Harrington was secretly documenting for unethical practices. Meanwhile, the public narrative portrays the Harringtons as staunch defenders of business interests and the Mitchells as labor sympathizers, when in reality they were united in opposing corporate exploitation. Emma had been studying county geological survey maps from different eras, comparing them with current water resource assessments. She called their attention to something they had overlooked. "There's something else significant about the well's location," she said, pointing to overlapping maps. "It's not just built on the property line. It's positioned directly above an underground water channel that feeds the county's main aquifer, essentially at the source of the region's water supply." Sam's eyes widened at the implication. And Horizon's developments are notoriously water-intensive. Golf courses, decorative lakes, private swimming pools. If they're planning to tap that water source for development during a drought, it would explain their sudden urgency to acquire your property, Dr. Garcia finished. Environmental regulations would normally prevent such exploitation, but if they owned the land outright, "We need to see if there's any documentation in the chamber about water rights," Sam decided. "If my ancestor and Harrington were forward-thinking enough to preserve evidence of corporate malfeasance, they might have also established legal protections for natural resources." Despite the county's order restricting access to the well, they determined that a limited, careful examination of specific documents might be justified given the potential threat to public resources. Dr. Garcia would make a quick descent to retrieve only the water rights documentation, taking care not to disturb other materials. As they approached the well site, however, they discovered concerning evidence of tampering. The security seals Deputy Wallace had placed on the temporary covering were broken, and fresh boot prints surrounded the structure, still visible in the dust despite someone's attempts to brush them away. "Someone's been down there," Dr. Garcia observed grimly after a quick inspection. "Recently, probably last night." Sam felt a surge of anger and betrayal. "They're removing evidence before the hearing. We need to document this immediately." Dr. Garcia carefully descended into the chamber while the others photographed the broken seals and footprints, establishing a clear record of the unauthorized access. His voice crackled over the radio minutes later, confirming their fears. "Several document cases have been disturbed, specifically those labeled water rights and Westerly Mining evidence. Some contents appear to be missing, based on the gaps in the organizational system and reference numbers visible on remaining materials." When he emerged, Dr. Garcia brought troubling news and a single consolation. They were selective in what they took: legal agreements establishing shared water rights protection, and the most damning evidence against westerly mining. But they missed something important. From his equipment bag, he produced a small leather-bound volume that had been hidden behind the larger document cases. This is Caleb Mitchell's personal journal. It contains copies of key agreements and detailed accounts of his collaboration with Francis Harrington, including their investigation into Westerly's practices. The journal revealed how the former enemies had discovered that Westerly mining had deliberately inflamed regional tensions after the war to prevent returning veterans from both armies from uniting around labor issues. Company agents had planted provocative stories in local newspapers, funded opposing political candidates, and even orchestrated confrontations at public events, all to maintain division in the workforce and prevent organized resistance to exploitative practices. "Listen to this entry from 1872, Margaret read aloud. "Today, F.H. brought evidence confirming our suspicions. Westerly's agent Barnes paid for the inflammatory editorial in the Southern Sentinel while simultaneously funding the Northern Tribune's response. Their game becomes clear. Keep us fighting each other so none question who profits from our division." Most damning was documentation of how Westerly had secured exclusive mineral and water rights throughout the county through manipulation, intimidation, and occasionally outright fraud, rights that had subsequently transferred through corporate succession to Harrington Enterprises. "This explains everything," Margaret breathed as they reviewed the journal's contents. "The modern Harrington companies have based their water access claims on legal precedents established through these questionable means. If these records were made public, their development plans throughout the drought-stricken region could face serious legal challenges," Sam finished. "No wonder they're so desperate to control this property." Emma had been studying the journal's final entries with growing excitement. "There's more. Caleb and Francis didn't just document the problems, they created a legal solution. They established the Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust, placing the aquifer access points under joint family protection with explicit prohibition against commercial exploitation during resource scarcity. Which means," Dr. Garcia added, gesturing toward the parched landscape visible through the window, "that the water rights Horizon is counting on for their developments are actually restricted during drought conditions by a 150-year-old trust that's still legally binding." "But they've taken the original trust documents," Sam pointed out. "Without those, we just have a second-hand account in a personal journal." "Not necessarily," Margaret interjected, her librarian's instincts activated. "Legal trusts of that era required registration with multiple authorities, county, state, and often federal land offices, especially for water rights. Copies would exist in government archives even if the originals are missing." As they discussed strategies for locating these alternative records, a vehicle approached the farmhouse, not the expected official cars, but an aging pickup truck with a faded County Parks Department logo. To everyone's surprise, Deputy Wallace emerged, out of uniform and visibly troubled. "I'm not here officially," he explained quickly, declining Sam's offer to come inside. "But you should know, Mayor Collins and Harrington are pushing for an emergency order to excavate the entire well structure for safety reasons before the hearing. They're claiming the chamber poses an imminent threat to groundwater safety." "That's absurd," Dr. Garcia protested. "The chamber has existed for 150 years without contaminating anything." "I know," Wallace agreed, glancing nervously towards the road. "But they're leveraging the drought emergency to fast-track the approval. They're trying to destroy the evidence before it can be properly documented." "How soon?" Sam asked, his stomach tightening. "Tomorrow morning. They've already requisitioned county excavation equipment. Once they remove the materials, they'll control the narrative about what was found." The deputy shifted uncomfortably. "I can't officially help you. But my grandmother always said the Mitchell and Harrington families shared a secret that could heal the county's oldest wounds. I think that's worth protecting. After Wallace departed, they faced a critical decision. The legal hearing was still days away, but the emergency excavation order would be executed within hours. The chamber's contents, what remained of them, needed protection, but moving historical artifacts against county orders carried serious legal consequences. "We need to bring this to the public immediately," Margaret suggested. "Once the information is widely known, it becomes harder to suppress." "But we need irrefutable documentation," Dr. Garcia cautioned. "Allegations without evidence won't stand against Harrington's legal resources." Sam remembered his grandfather's journal entry. "The well must remain sealed but preserved, its contents protected not from historical interest, but from those who would misuse its significance." His ancestors hadn't simply been preserving historical curiosities, they had been safeguarding evidence of corporate manipulation that had shaped the community's development for generations. "We'll digitize everything immediately," he decided. "Every document, every artifact, every page of the journal, with proper authentication protocols. Then we distribute copies to multiple trusted sources before they can execute the excavation order." Emma, who had been unusually quiet during this exchange, suddenly looked up from the property maps she'd been studying. "There's something else we're missing. The journal mentions a secondary preservation site as insurance against discovery or destruction of the main chamber. It's referenced as where waters meet beneath stone." Deputy Wallace's expression had changed at the phrase. "The old spring house, where the underground streams converge under Sentinel Rock. It's on the border between the original Mitchell and Harrington properties." This forgotten structure, half buried in undergrowth at the property's edge, had been used generations ago to keep dairy products cool using flowing spring water. Long abandoned with the advent of refrigeration, it had faded from regular use and attention, the perfect secondary hiding place. The spring house proved difficult to locate, its stone walls nearly invisible beneath decades of vegetation. When they finally identified the structure, its entrance was sealed with a rusted iron door, the lock mechanism so corroded that even Harold's antique keys couldn't turn it. Eventually, they were forced to break the aging hinges, promising each other they would restore it properly once the emergency had passed. The interior was a revelation. Though much smaller than the well chamber, the spring house contained a carefully constructed stone vault built into its foundation, protected by ingenious waterproofing techniques involving sealed glass containers and waxed canvas wrappings. They found duplicate copies of the most critical documents, including complete water rights agreements and evidence of Westerly Mining's manipulations. Most significantly, they discovered a signed confession from Vernon Westerly, the mining company's founder, acknowledging his role in deliberately maintaining social divisions for profit. The document, witnessed by both Mitchell and Harrington, admitted to funding opposing political factions, bribing newspaper editors to publish inflammatory stories, and even orchestrating violent incidents attributed to sectional tensions. "This is explosive," Margaret whispered, carefully photographing each document. "It completely contradicts the accepted narrative of Riverdale's development after the Civil War." Dr. Garcia examined the waterproofing techniques with professional admiration. "This is remarkable foresight." They created redundant archives with superior preservation methods, anticipating that powerful interests might attempt to destroy the primary evidence. By mid-afternoon, they had secured digital copies of everything from both locations. Dr. Garcia had colleagues at the State University ready to authenticate the materials, while Margaret arranged for secure storage of the originals in the Historical Society's climate-controlled vault. As they finished transporting the Springhouse documents, a courier arrived with an official envelope from the county administration. Inside was the emergency excavation order, scheduled for 7 a.m. the following morning, citing urgent public safety concerns related to potential groundwater contamination during extreme drought conditions. "They're not even waiting for darkness," Sam observed bitterly. "They're using official authority to openly destroy historical evidence." "We need legal intervention," Margaret insisted. "These documents establish clear historical significance that should trigger automatic protection under state preservation laws." While Dr. Garcia made urgent calls to the State Historical Commission and Environmental Protection Agency, Emma noticed something they had overlooked in Caleb Mitchell's journal: a reference to a direct link between the underground water channel beneath the well and the county reservoir that supplied drinking water to most of Riverdale's residents. If that connection still exists, she realized, then tampering with the well structure could potentially affect the entire county's water supply, not just our farm. This information transformed their defensive strategy. Rather than fighting the excavations solely on historical preservation grounds, they could argue that the emergency work itself posed the true public safety threat, potentially contaminating the water supply during a drought emergency when alternative sources were unavailable. Sam immediately contacted Jennifer Walsh, the attorney who had handled his grandfather's estate. Though initially reluctant to challenge the county directly, the evidence they presented convinced her to file for an emergency injunction based on both historical preservation and public safety concerns. "We'll file electronically tonight and request an emergency hearing first thing tomorrow morning," she explained. "But you should be prepared for them to show up with excavation equipment regardless. Government entities sometimes act before legal processes can stop them, especially when powerful interests are involved." As sunset painted the drought-stricken farmland in golden hues, they gathered around the kitchen table to review everything they had discovered and prepare for the confrontation they knew would come with dawn. "There's one more thing we should consider," Dr. Garcia suggested, studying the maps of underground water channels. "If the well truly sits atop the main aquifer access point, as these documents suggest, then Horizon's interest likely extends beyond historical suppression. Their development plans would require unprecedented water access during drought conditions, access that would be legally restricted by the Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust if its existence became public knowledge." So this isn't just about burying embarrassing historical revelations, Sam concluded. It's about current water rights worth millions during a drought. "Possibly billions," Margaret corrected, pointing to Horizon's development portfolio spread across 3 drought-affected counties. "Water is becoming more valuable than land itself in these conditions." As they continued strategizing late into the evening, headlights appeared on the long driveway. Not the expected county vehicles, but a sleek black Mercedes that none of them recognized. To everyone's surprise, James Harrington III emerged alone, looking considerably less composed than during his earlier visit. "Mr. Mitchell," he called from the edge of the porch, "I'd like to speak with you privately if possible." Sam hesitated, then nodded. "Anything you have to say can be said in front of my allies. They've seen everything in the chamber and the springhouse." Harrington's expression revealed momentary shock. "You found the springhouse archive? Brennan assured me it was just a myth." "It's very real," Sam confirmed, studying the older man's reaction carefully. "Complete with Vernon Westerly's signed confession and the original Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust documents." Harrington requested a chair, suddenly looking every year of his age. "I'd like to speak frankly," he began, after sitting down heavily. "I know someone accessed the chamber last night. It wasn't done at my directive, though Brennan likely took initiative he shouldn't have." "Why should we believe that?" Emma challenged directly. "Because Harrington sighed. I didn't know exactly what was down there until this afternoon when Brennan showed me what he had removed. I knew family legends about some kind of historical archive, but the specifics have been lost through generations. Sam studied the man carefully, trying to gauge his sincerity. You expect us to believe the CEO of Harrington Enterprises had no idea about documents that could fundamentally undermine your company's water rights during a drought? Harrington nodded, his expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. My family history is complicated. The public narrative of the Harrington legacy as champions of industrial development has been central to our identity for generations. What you've discovered challenges that narrative in fundamental ways. Your ancestor chose reconciliation and truth over maintaining artificial divisions, Sam pointed out. That seems like a legacy worth acknowledging. It's not that simple, Harrington replied, his corporate polish giving way to genuine complexity. The modern Harrington Enterprises employ thousands. Our developments have created prosperity throughout the region, even if their foundations are more complex than the official history suggests. And the water rights? Sam asked directly. The trust your ancestor established with mine specifically prohibited exploitation during drought conditions. A flash of surprise crossed Harrington's face. You found the Water Trust documents intact? Brennan told me they were damaged beyond legibility. We found complete copies in the Springhouse archive, Dr. Garcia confirmed, along with extensive documentation of how Westerly Mining manipulated social divisions for profit, practices that, according to these records, continued under subsequent corporate leadership, including your grandfather. Harrington was silent for a long moment, staring out at the darkening farmland. My grandfather spoke of family secrets once, near the end of his life. He said the true Harrington legacy wasn't what people believed, but he never elaborated. I always assumed he meant some personal indiscretion, not this. The question now, Sam pressed, is what happens with this information? Your company is actively pursuing development projects that violate the Water Trust during a drought emergency. If these documents become public, Harrington acknowledged, the legal implications for Horizon would be substantial. But beyond that, the social impact of revealing how deeply Riverdale's divisions were manufactured for profit. Maybe that revelation is exactly what the community needs, Margaret suggested. The reconciliation your ancestor and Caleb, Mitchell began, was deliberately suppressed to maintain corporate control. Perhaps it's time to complete what they started. Their conversation was interrupted by Emma, who had been monitoring local social media on her laptop. Everyone needs to see this, she called urgently. The county government's official page had just announced a revised schedule for the emergency excavation, midnight tonight instead of tomorrow morning, citing deteriorating conditions requiring immediate intervention. They're accelerating the timeline, Dr. Garcia observed grimly. Someone must have informed them about the Springhouse discovery. All eyes turned to Harrington, whose expression revealed genuine surprise. This wasn't my doing, he insisted. I came here to discuss a potential compromise, not to enable destruction of historical materials. Yet your company stands to benefit most from that destruction, Sam pointed out. Before Harrington could respond, Jennifer Walsh called with alarming news. The county judge denied our emergency hearing request, claiming insufficient evidence of historical significance or public safety concerns. They're legally cleared to proceed with excavation. As they contemplated this setback, Deputy Wallace's pickup truck came racing up the driveway, skidding to a stop near the porch. He jumped out, urgency evident in every movement. They're mobilizing now, he reported breathlessly. Heavy equipment is already being transported to your property. Mayor Collins called in private contractors instead of county workers, people who won't ask questions about midnight excavation during a drought emergency. The timeline had compressed from hours to minutes. They needed to make immediate decisions about how to protect both the physical site and the historical documentation they had recovered. "I can stall them at the main gate," Wallace offered. "Check permits, verification orders, equipment safety, but it won't hold them for long." Dr. Garcia was already contacting colleagues at the State Historical Commission, but even with emergency procedures, official intervention would take time they didn't have. Margaret called local media outlets, hoping public attention might create enough pressure to pause the destruction. During this flurry of desperate activity, James Harrington remained surprisingly quiet, watching the Mitchell Farms defenders with an expression of growing respect. Finally, he stood and asked for everyone's attention. "There's another option," he said quietly. "As the current Harrington trustee, I have equal authority with Mr. Mitchell regarding the Riverdale Reconciliation Archives under the original trust agreement. I could file an immediate cease and desist based on my family's legal interest in these materials." "Why would you do that?" Sam asked skeptically. "Your company benefits most from suppressing these records." "Because some legacies matter more than quarterly profits," Harrington replied, his gaze moving from the farmhouse to the distant well site. "My ancestor and yours were enemies who found common ground in opposing manipulation and exploitation. Their courage deserves better than to be buried again for corporate convenience." With no time for extended deliberation, they accepted Harrington's offer. He immediately called the county legal department, invoking his status as Harrington trustee to demand immediate cessation of any excavation activities related to the Mitchell-Harrington archives. The combination of his corporate influence and specific legal claims regarding the trust created enough uncertainty that the county council advised Mayor Collins to temporarily suspend operations pending clarification. This temporary reprieve gave them time to implement broader protections, while Harrington made additional calls, leveraging his considerable influence to secure a formal historical preservation order from the state. The others continued documenting and securing both the physical evidence and its digital copies. By dawn, they had achieved a precarious victory. State historical preservation officials had issued emergency protection orders for both the well chamber and springhouse sites. Environmental agencies had initiated investigations into potential water safety violations, represented by Horizon's development plans. Local media had arrived at the farm, drawn by Margaret's strategic calls about significant historical discoveries endangering county water rights. The morning sunlight revealed an extraordinary scene. State officials, local reporters, environmental inspectors, and curious community members gathered around the well site, where Deputy Wallace and 2 state troopers now stood guard against unauthorized access. Mayor Collins arrived looking distinctly uncomfortable, especially when confronted by reporters' questions about the overnight excavation orders and their abrupt cancellation. Richard Brennan was notably absent, though rumors circulated that he had been seen leaving Horizon's local offices with boxes of materials in the pre-dawn hours. As the impromptu gathering evolved into something resembling a community forum, Sam found himself standing beside James Harrington, watching as Dr. Garcia explained the historical significance of the chamber to an enthralled audience. "Your intervention surprised me," Sam admitted quietly. "I'm still not entirely convinced of your motives." Harrington nodded, accepting the skepticism as reasonable. "My grandfather once told me that the measure of a person isn't in never making mistakes, but in how they respond when confronted with uncomfortable truths. I've spent the night reading Francis Harrington's journal entries from the Springhouse archive. His words, they've shifted something fundamental in how I understand my family's legacy." Before Sam could respond, Emma approached with a reporter from the Riverdale Gazette, who requested a joint statement from the Mitchell and Harrington families. This unexpected alliance, descendants of supposed historical enemies standing together, created a powerful visual that perfectly complemented the historical narrative emerging from the chamber's contents. Our ancestors discovered that their perceived enmity served interests beyond their own, Sam explained to the growing crowd. They preserved evidence of how social divisions were deliberately manufactured and maintained for corporate profit, divisions that have shaped Riverdale's development for generations. Harrington added, the Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust they established wasn't just about protecting natural resources. It represented their shared vision of a community not defined by artificial divisions, but by mutual stewardship of what truly matters. These statements, broadcast on local news and rapidly spreading through social media, transformed public understanding of the well discovery from a minor historical curiosity to a revelation with profound implications for contemporary Riverdale. People began sharing family stories that had never aligned with the official historical narrative, stories of cooperation across supposed factional lines, mutual aid during hardships, and resistance to manipulated divisions. Over the following days, as the formal County Historical Commission hearing approached, community interest in the chamber's contents grew exponentially. Dr. Garcia's team conducted proper archaeological documentation, creating detailed catalogues of the artifacts and documents while ensuring their preservation. Margaret organized public presentations at the library, contextualizing the discoveries within regional history. Most significantly, the Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust received renewed legal recognition. Environmental attorneys confirmed its continuing validity, with implications extending far beyond Sam's farm to affect water usage throughout drought-stricken counties where Horizon had planned developments. Richard Brennan resigned from Horizon Development, citing personal reasons that local speculation connected to his unauthorized removal of historical documents. Mayor Collins, facing uncomfortable questions about his role in the attempted midnight excavation, announced he would not seek re-election in the upcoming term. When the County Historical Commission finally convened its hearing, the room overflowed, with community members eager to witness the proceedings. What had been planned as a procedural formality became a watershed moment in Riverdale's self-understanding. Sam and Harrington presented a joint proposal for preserving both the physical sites and their historical contents. Rather than competing claims of ownership, they emphasized shared stewardship, reflecting their ancestors' original intentions. The Mitchell and Harrington families were manipulated into opposition that served corporate interests, Sam explained to the commission. Our ancestors discovered this manipulation and preserved evidence for future generations. We honor their courage by continuing their work of reconciliation. The Commission unanimously approved historical designation for both the Well Chamber and Springhouse, providing permanent protection against development or destruction. More significantly, they recommended a comprehensive review of Riverdale's official historical narrative in light of these discoveries. As summer heat intensified the drought's grip on the region, the Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust emerged as a model of a sustainable resource management during scarcity. Its prohibitions against exploitative development during drought conditions provided legal frameworks that other communities began adopting for their own water protection. For Sam personally, the financial pressures that had initially seemed insurmountable were gradually resolving. The historical designation qualified the farm for preservation grants that covered the outstanding taxes. Agricultural extension specialists, intrigued by the water management systems documented in the chamber archives, offered technical assistance for implementing drought-resistant farming techniques. Most unexpectedly, James Harrington proposed a substantive partnership rather than a property purchase. Horizon Development would shift its focus from water-intensive luxury housing to sustainable agricultural technology, with the Mitchell Farm serving as a demonstration site for innovations that honored both families' legacies of responsible stewardship. "My ancestor didn't just document problems," Harrington explained during a planning meeting at the farmhouse. He envisioned solutions that balanced progress with protection. Horizon can either fight that vision or fulfill it, and I've decided we'll choose the latter. By late summer, as a tentative rain finally dampened the parched fields, the underground chamber had been properly stabilized by historical preservation experts. Climate controls protected the remaining artifacts while allowing controlled research access. A viewing area let visitors observe the chamber without endangering the fragile materials inside. The Springhouse archive, equally protected, revealed additional dimensions of the Mitchell-Harrington collaboration. Beyond documenting corporate manipulation, it contained extensive correspondence between the former enemies, discussing philosophical questions about reconciliation, ethical business practices, and community development that transcended sectional loyalties. They weren't just pragmatic allies against a common enemy, Margaret observed, while cataloguing these materials. They developed a genuine intellectual partnership, challenging the dominant thinking of their era. This dimension resonated particularly with Emma, who had decided to pursue environmental law after her experience defending the Water Trust. They were thinking generations ahead, she noted, creating legal frameworks that could protect resources long after they were gone. As autumn approached, bringing more consistent rainfall that began easing the drought's severity, Riverdale hosted a community commemoration of the chamber's discovery. The event, held at the Mitchell Farm, drew hundreds of residents curious to see the preserved well site and learn about its historical significance. Dr. Garcia led educational tours, explaining how the chamber had been constructed and maintained over generations. Margaret presented exhibitions of key documents, showing how artificially maintained divisions had shaped the town's development. Local school groups performed historical reenactments based on the newly discovered narrative of post-war reconciliation. Most powerfully, elderly residents from throughout the community came forward to share family stories that had been dismissed as contradicting the official history. Tales of friendships across supposed faction lines, mutual aid during hardships, and resistance to manipulated divisions that powerful interests had worked to maintain. "My grandfather always said the Mitchell and Harrington men weren't really enemies," one 90-year-old resident recalled to an attentive audience. He claimed they met secretly to discuss how townspeople were being played against each other. Nobody believed him because it contradicted everything in the history books. As these alternative narratives emerged, the community began recognizing how deeply artificial divisions had been embedded in Riverdale's structure. From housing patterns and school districting to political affiliations and social organizations, committees formed to address these lingering separations, using the historical reconciliation as inspiration for contemporary healing. Standing at the edge of his cornfield, watching visitors explore the historical exhibits, Sam reflected on how dramatically his circumstances had changed in just a few months. The farm that had verged on foreclosure was now financially stable through a combination of preservation grants, sustainable agriculture initiatives, and partnership with a reimagined Harrington Enterprises. The drought that had threatened to end his family's agricultural legacy had instead revealed a deeper inheritance: the moral courage his ancestors had demonstrated in preserving truth against powerful opposition. What had begun as a desperate search for water during scarcity had uncovered something perhaps more essential: the historical foundations for community healing that had been deliberately buried for generations. Emma joined him, her expression reflective as she observed the gathering. "Grandpa Harold knew this would happen, didn't he? That's why he made sure you inherited the farm and learned about the well when you did." Sam nodded slowly. His journal said something that makes more sense now, that each generation of Mitchells had protected the chamber not just from historical interest, but until the moment when its contents could heal rather than harm. He must have seen signs that Riverdale was finally ready to confront these truths. "The timing is remarkable," Emma agreed. "The drought forcing us to look deeper for water, just when the community needs to look deeper at its divisions." Their conversation was interrupted by James Harrington, who approached with a distinguished-looking woman he introduced as Dr. Eleanor Wells, a historian specializing in post-Civil War reconciliation efforts. Dr. Wells believes the Mitchell-Harrington collaboration may represent one of the most thoroughly documented cases of cross-sectional cooperation during Reconstruction, Harrington explained. She's proposing a book that would contextualize their work within the broader historical patterns of manufactured divisions serving economic interests. "The documentation is extraordinary," Dr. Wells added, her enthusiasm evident. "Most reconciliation efforts from this period left minimal written records due to social pressures and safety concerns. Your ancestors created not just an archive, but a detailed account of how they recognized and resisted manipulation." As Sam discussed the potential research project with Dr. Wells, he noticed community members from traditionally opposed Riverdale factions engaged in animated conversations throughout the property. The historical revelations were catalyzing contemporary connections, exactly as Caleb Mitchell and Francis Harrington might have hoped when they sealed their archive 150 years earlier. The following months brought steady transformation to both the Mitchell farm and the broader Riverdale community. The State Historical Commission provided funding for proper preservation of the well chamber and spring house, creating protected historical sites that maintained their integrity while allowing controlled research access. The main farmhouse, renovated through a heritage preservation grant, now included a small museum displaying reproductions of key documents from the underground archives. Most significantly, the Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust was fully reinstated with expanded powers, establishing a model for sustainable water management that attracted attention from drought-affected communities throughout the region. Rather than water-intensive luxury developments, Horizon's reimagined projects incorporated agricultural technology centers, water conservation initiatives, and sustainable housing designed to minimize environmental impact while creating economic opportunities. The corporate records from the chamber revealing Westerly Mining's deliberate manipulation of social divisions became the foundation for a community reconciliation project. Facilitated by professional mediators, these discussions allowed Riverdale residents to examine how manufactured tensions had shaped everything from neighborhood development patterns to school districting, political affiliations, and social organizations. What's most powerful about these archives, the project director explained during a community forum, is how clearly they demonstrate that the divisions we've accepted as inevitable were deliberately created and maintained to serve specific economic interests. Recognizing this manipulation is the first step toward authentic community healing. For Sam personally, the transformation extended beyond financial stability. The farm that had verged on foreclosure was now thriving through a combination of sustainable agriculture initiatives, historical tourism, and educational programs that brought regular visitors to learn about both the agricultural innovations and historical significance of the property. Emma had returned to university with a newfound sense of purpose, double majoring in environmental science and historical preservation, with plans for law school focused on water rights. Her experiences defending the Mitchell-Harrington archives had revealed her passion for protecting both natural resources and historical truth. One crisp October morning, as the first frost silvered the newly harvested fields, Sam walked the property perimeter with James Harrington, discussing plans for an expanded educational center that would showcase sustainable water management techniques alongside the historical exhibits. "I've been thinking about our ancestors," Harrington said, pausing at the ridge overlooking both properties. "They became unlikely allies by recognizing a manipulation that kept them artificially divided. I wonder what other supposed enmities in our time might actually serve interests beyond those involved." Sam nodded thoughtfully. The chamber documents show how effectively westerly mining controlled the narrative, funding opposing newspapers, politicians, and community leaders, while maintaining the public perception of neutral business interests. Those techniques seem remarkably familiar in contemporary contexts, which is precisely why this history matters beyond local interest, Harrington agreed. The methods of manufacturing division have evolved, but the fundamental strategy remains effective. Keep potentially allied groups focused on their differences rather than questioning who benefits from their separation. Their conversation was interrupted by Dr. Garcia's arrival. The preservation team had discovered something unexpected during the ongoing cataloging of chamber materials: a sealed metal container hidden within a false bottom of one of the storage cabinets, containing documents dated later than the chamber's supposed sealing in 1877. This suggests someone, likely subsequent generations of both families, continued adding materials to the archive well into the 1900s, Dr. Garcia explained, as they examined the newly discovered container. It wasn't just the original Mitchell and Harrington who maintained this collaboration. Their descendants continued documenting corporate manipulation across decades. The container revealed correspondence between Caleb Mitchell's son and Francis, Harrington's nephew, dated 1902, discussing how the original westerly techniques of maintaining social division had evolved through more sophisticated methods. Additional materials from the 1930s, added by the next generation, documented how economic interests during the Depression had again leveraged community tensions to prevent unified labor organizing. This wasn't just an isolated historical collaboration, Margaret Wilson observed when presented with these materials. It was an intergenerational commitment to documenting manipulation and preserving evidence for future reconciliation. What particularly struck Sam was how these later archivists had recognized their limitations. A note from his grandfather Thomas Mitchell, dated 1947, acknowledged, "Like our fathers before us, we preserve these truths without revealing them. Recognizing our time is not yet ready for their reception. We document patterns of division without the power to overcome them, trusting future generations will find the moment when healing becomes possible." This multi-generational perspective transformed Sam's understanding of his inheritance. The Mitchell family hadn't simply preserved physical property and historical artifacts. They had maintained a legacy of moral witness, documenting manipulation they couldn't directly confront, but refused to ignore. By winter, as snow blanketed the drought-recovered farmland, the State University had established a research center focused on the Mitchell-Harrington archives. Historians, sociologists, and political scientists examined the documents for insights into how manufactured division had shaped regional development across generations. These archives provide a unique longitudinal study of deliberate social manipulation, the research director explained during a presentation at the farm's new educational center. Most significantly, They demonstrate how techniques evolved from crude sectional antagonism in the 1870s to increasingly sophisticated methods by the mid-20th century. The university partnership brought additional resources for preserving both the physical structures and their contents. Advanced conservation techniques protected the original documents while creating high-resolution digital archives accessible to researchers worldwide. Archaeological experts carefully stabilized the underground chamber, ensuring its structural integrity would endure for future generations. Local education underwent significant transformation as Riverdale schools incorporated the revised historical understanding into their curricula. Rather than the traditional narrative of inevitable sectional tensions, students learned about the documented evidence of how economic interests had manipulated community divisions for profit. What's most powerful for young people, Emma observed after guest teaching a high school history class, is recognizing that historical narratives aren't fixed truths, but constructed stories that often serve particular interests. It teaches critical thinking about contemporary divisions as well. This educational approach sparked controversy among some traditional community leaders who preferred the established historical narrative, but the extensive documentation from the chamber archives provided irrefutable evidence that could not be easily dismissed. After initial resistance, many came to appreciate how this more complex understanding actually honored the courage of community members who had resisted manipulation across generations. The Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust became a model for sustainable resource management during climate uncertainty. Its legal framework, updated for contemporary conditions but maintaining the original principles, provided protection against exploitation while ensuring equitable access across the community. Other drought-affected regions began studying and adapting this approach, creating a ripple effect of sustainable water governance extending far beyond Riverdale. James Harrington faced significant corporate challenges implementing Horizon's strategic redirection away from water-intensive luxury development towards sustainable initiatives. Some board members and investors initially resisted what they perceived as abandoning profitable business models for historical sentimentality. The quarterly returns on sustainable development won't match luxury properties in the short term. One particularly vocal board member argued during a contentious meeting. Perhaps, Harrington acknowledged, but the long-term catastrophe of developing water-intensive projects during climate instability ensures no returns whatsoever when resources collapse. Our ancestors understood sustainability before we had the term. They created legal protections against exploitation that have proven remarkably prescient. This perspective gradually gained traction as climate realities made water-intensive development increasingly problematic. Horizon's sustainable initiatives began attracting partners focused on long-term regional viability rather than short-term profit maximization, creating a corporate evolution that paralleled the community's social transformation. Spring brought renewed growth to the Mitchell farm, not just in the carefully planted fields utilizing drought-resistant techniques, but in the expanding educational programs that now regularly brought visitors from throughout the region. School groups, historical societies, environmental organizations, and community development experts came to learn from both the agricultural innovations and the reconciliation model emergent from the chamber archives. The well site itself, professionally preserved with a protective structure that maintained the historical stonework while allowing controlled access, became a powerful symbol of how hidden truths could eventually emerge to transform community understanding. Visitors often remarked on the metaphorical significance of a dry well, revealing something more valuable than water during drought, the historical foundation for contemporary healing. During a particularly meaningful community ceremony marking the one-year anniversary of the Chamber's discovery, elderly residents from historically opposed Riverdale factions shared family stories that had previously been dismissed as contradicting official narratives. "My grandmother told me the Mitchells and Harringtons secretly worked together," one 92-year-old resident recounted. "Everyone thought she was confused or making up stories because it contradicted everything we were taught. Now we know she was preserving truth that hadn't yet found its moment." These alternative memories, long suppressed by dominant narratives, created a richer, more complex understanding of Riverdale's development. Rather than a community inevitably divided by historical circumstances, residents began recognizing patterns of resistance to manipulation that had persisted alongside the manufactured tensions. Dr. Wells' book on the Mitchell-Harrington collaboration, published by the University Press, received national attention for its thorough documentation of how economic interests had deliberately maintained sectional divisions long after the Civil War's conclusion. Academic reviewers praised its meticulous use of primary sources, while popular readers appreciated its relevance to contemporary social divisions. "What makes this case study so compelling," Dr. Wells explained during a book presentation at the farm, "is the comprehensive documentation of techniques used to manufacture division. Controlled media narratives, strategic political funding, orchestrated confrontations, and economic pressure against cooperation. These methods remain remarkably effective in current contexts." The book's final chapter explored how recognizing these patterns of manipulation could potentially transform other communities struggling with seemingly entrenched divisions. By documenting how the Riverdale reconciliation process had unfolded, following the Chamber's discovery, it offered a potential roadmap for similar healing elsewhere. Summer brought the completion of the expanded educational center on the Mitchell property, a collaborative project between the farm, the Historical Society, and Harrington Enterprises. The facility included exhibition spaces displaying reproductions of chamber documents, interactive displays explaining water conservation techniques, and meeting areas for community reconciliation dialogues. During the dedication ceremony, Sam and James Harrington unveiled a commemorative plaque honoring their ancestors' courage in documenting manipulation they could not directly confront but refused to ignore. The inscription, drawn from both families' archived writings, read, "Truth preserved beneath the surface eventually finds its way to light, transforming artificial division into authentic community when courage meets its moment." Mayor Collins, who had initially supported the attempted destruction of the chamber, had undergone his own transformation after the full historical documentation became public. Facing a challenging re-election campaign, he had chosen a different approach than continued resistance. "I was wrong," he acknowledged during the dedication. "Like many in Riverdale, I accepted historical narratives that served particular interests without questioning their foundations. These archives have offered our community an opportunity to recognize manipulation that has shaped our development for generations." Richard Brennan had departed Riverdale shortly after his resignation from Horizon, but rumors occasionally surfaced about his attempts to suppress similar historical revelations in other communities where development interests conflicted with water protection efforts. His career trajectory became a cautionary tale within the sustainable development community about choosing short-term profit over historical truth and environmental responsibility. As the drought-recovered farms surrounding Riverdale produced their first abundant harvest in 3 years, the community celebrated with a festival that deliberately integrated traditions previously segregated along factional lines. Foods, music, crafts, and stories that had been preserved within separate community segments now merged in a shared cultural expression that honored distinct heritage while recognizing common humanity. For Sam, watching this community transformation, while standing beside the preserved well that had catalyzed it, the journey from financial crisis to historical revelation seemed both improbable and inevitable. The drought that had threatened his family's agricultural legacy had revealed something perhaps more essential: the moral courage his ancestors had demonstrated in documenting truth when they could not yet implement justice. "Do you think they knew this would eventually happen?" Emma asked, joining her father as sunset painted the gathering in golden light. That someday these records would actually heal the divisions they were documenting? "I think they hoped," Sam replied, remembering his grandfather's journal entry about preserving truth without knowing when it might safely emerge. They couldn't confront these powers directly in their lifetime, but they refused to let manipulated narratives stand. Unchallenged, they preserved evidence for a future they wouldn't see, but believed would eventually arrive. James Harrington approached, accompanying an elderly couple he introduced as distant relatives of Francis Harrington, who had traveled from across the country after learning about the chamber discovery. Their family stories had included fragments about the secret cooperation between Harrington and Mitchell, but these had been dismissed as apocryphal until the archives provided confirmation. "Our grandmother insisted there was more to the story than the official histories claimed," the woman explained. "She said the real Harrington legacy wasn't what appeared in county records or company histories. Now we understand what she meant." This pattern repeated across the region as descendants of original Riverdale families discovered that alternative memories preserved within their families, often dismissed as contradicting established narratives, contained important truths that aligned with the chamber's documentation. These personal connections to the historical revelations deepened community investment in the reconciliation process. Dr. Garcia's archaeological team continued making discoveries as they carefully documented the chamber's construction. The engineering techniques used to create the underground space revealed sophisticated knowledge of water flow and geological stability that had enabled the structure to remain intact for 150 years despite changing groundwater conditions. Whoever designed this understood not just masonry and structural support, but hydrology and geological stability, Dr. Garcia explained during a professional conference presentation. They created a preservation environment that maintained remarkably stable temperature and humidity conditions using only 19th century technology. This expertise prompted additional research into traditional water management techniques, documented in the chamber archives. Historical methods for sustainable aquifer access, drought mitigation, and water conservation offered valuable insights for contemporary challenges, creating a bridge between historical preservation and environmental innovation. The Mitchell-Harrington Water Trust expanded its scope beyond immediate drought response to implement long-term sustainability planning. By incorporating both historical water wisdom and contemporary climate science, it established management practices designed to maintain resource viability through increasingly unpredictable weather patterns. 2 years after the chamber's discovery, as another summer drought threatened the region, Riverdale demonstrated remarkable resilience compared to surrounding communities. The water conservation infrastructure developed through trust initiatives maintained stable supply for both agricultural and residential needs, without resorting to severe restrictions or emergency measures. The difference, Sam explained to visiting officials from drought-affected counties, is that our approach isn't just technical, but social. The historical reconciliation process helped our community recognize shared interests that transcend artificial divisions, enabling cooperative resource management instead of competitive exploitation. This integrated approach to environmental and social resilience attracted national attention. Government agencies, academic institutions, and community development organizations sent representatives to study what was becoming known as the Riverdale model of reconciliation-based resource governance. For Sam personally, this external validation confirmed what he had intuitively recognized when first discovering his grandfather's cryptic note, "When water fails above, seek truth below." The drought had revealed something more valuable than water itself, the historical foundation for community transformation that transcended artificial division and enabled sustainable cooperation. The Mitchell farm, once verging on foreclosure due to drought and debt, had become a nexus for environmental innovation, historical preservation, and community reconciliation. The educational programs developed with university partners regularly brought visitors from throughout the country to learn about sustainable agriculture techniques, water conservation strategies, and the historical documentation of manufactured division. What began as a desperate search for water has uncovered a different kind of sustenance, Sam observed during a community gathering marking the second anniversary of the Chamber's discovery. Our ancestors preserved not just historical artifacts, but a moral framework for recognizing manipulation and choosing reconciliation despite powerful opposition. Emma, home from university for summer break, had developed a program connecting local high school students with the ongoing research into the Chamber archives. These young people brought fresh perspectives to historical materials, identifying patterns of manipulation that resonated with their contemporary experiences of social media, political polarization, and economic pressure. What's most valuable about engaging young people with these archives, Emma explained to a visiting educational delegation, is how quickly they recognize similar tactics in current contexts. The specifics have evolved, but the fundamental strategy of maintaining artificial division to prevent unified questioning of who profits from separation remains remarkably consistent. This generational perspective enriched the community's understanding of both historical patterns and contemporary challenges. Rather than viewing reconciliation as simply addressing past divisions, Riverdale began developing proactive approaches to recognizing and resisting current manipulation techniques before they could calcify into seemingly permanent separations. The expanded educational center hosted regular workshops on recognizing manufactured division, helping community members develop critical awareness of how media narratives, political funding patterns, and economic pressures often served interests beyond those directly involved in apparent conflicts. This awareness created resilience against efforts to fragment community cohesion around artificial distinctions. James Harrington's professional transformation paralleled the community's evolution. Having redirected Horizon's development approach towards sustainable initiatives despite significant corporate resistance, he now found himself invited to industry conferences to discuss the business case for integrated environmental and social responsibility. My ancestor Francis Harrington recognized that prosperity built on exploitation, whether of natural resources or social division, ultimately creates instability that undermines genuine progress, he explained during a keynote address at a regional development symposium. What we're attempting now is development that enhances rather than depletes both environmental and social capital. This perspective gained traction as climate realities increasingly demonstrated the limitations of traditional development models. Horizon's sustainable initiatives began outperforming conventional approaches as water scarcity and community resistance made extractive development increasingly costly and complicated. The well chamber itself, professionally preserved with climate, controls and structural reinforcement, continued yielding insights as researchers methodically documented its contents. Beyond the immediate historical revelations about post-Civil War manipulation, the archives contained valuable information about sustainable agricultural practices, traditional ecological knowledge, and community governance models that offered potential solutions to contemporary challenges. What makes these archives truly remarkable, Margaret Wilson observed during a presentation to the State Historical Society, is how they connect documentation of problems with preservation of solutions. They don't just reveal manipulation, but offer alternatives that their era couldn't implement, but sought to preserve for future possibilities. This future-oriented preservation created a profound sense of intergenerational connection. 5 generations of Mitchells and Harringtons had maintained this archive, not knowing if or when its contents might catalyze the reconciliation they envisioned. Their persistence, despite uncertainty, represented a form of hope extending beyond immediate circumstances toward possibilities they might never witness but refuse to abandon. 3 years after the Chamber's discovery, as Riverdale hosted a regional conference on sustainable communities through historical reconciliation, Sam stood at the edge of his thriving fields, watching visitors explore the educational exhibits. Throughout the property, the farm that had nearly been lost to drought and debt had become a model of integrated resilience, productive agriculture utilizing sustainable water management, historical preservation honoring intergenerational truth-keeping, and community reconciliation transforming manufactured division into authentic connection. The underground chamber that Harold Mitchell had cryptically directed his grandson to discover when the land is most thirsty had revealed something far more valuable than water during drought: the historical foundation for community transformation. What had begun as a desperate search for resources to save a struggling farm had uncovered the moral courage of ancestors who had documented manipulation they couldn't directly confront, but refused to let stand unchallenged for future generations. As twilight gathered over the Mitchell homestead, now bustling with visitors from throughout the region, Sam recognized how completely his understanding of inheritance had transformed. Beyond land, buildings, and financial considerations, his grandfather had entrusted him with something far more significant: the responsibility of bringing buried truth into light when the community was finally ready to receive it. "Truth may rest beneath the surface," Sam quoted from the plaque now marking the preserved well entrance, "but eventually finds its way to light when courage meets its moment." The drought that had threatened to end his family's agricultural legacy had instead revealed their most essential inheritance: the moral conviction to preserve truth until reconciliation became possible, however many generations that might require. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.